For sure, I think paying $4,000 for a college education instead of $100,000, that sounds like a good plan to me.
Peterson Academy is providing an alternative, but clearly if an alternative is needed, clearly there's a state of dysfunction or dissatisfaction.
So in 2019, it looks like 37% of students in general were at or above proficient reading level in grade 12.
Meanwhile, we're scaring kids saying, if you don't go into this huge amount of debt, then you are going to be destitute.
We have to tread careful here because it's easy to throw higher education into one big basket and say it's just deplorable, to take Hillary Clinton's phrase.
Hello, welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Sterling, Thomas, and Andrew.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Today we're talking about the Peterson Academy, which we're calling the coming cure to higher education. We may retitle this, but... All right, we're going to watch a video about Peterson Academy right now. So hopefully you'll be watching that on your screen as we watch it.
We thought, what if we could make getting a degree 95% less expensive? Because that's a pretty funny target. It's like, we're going to undercut you by 95%.
That's what
I'm a
everything.
fan.
And offer a better quality experience along the way. Why wouldn't it be good to provide everybody,
Hang,
at
Brett
least in
Weinstein,
principle,
Will
with
Ferrell.
access to the best lecturers? I
thought it said Will Ferrell
Why
there for a
should we
second.
be generally educated? Can
Well, on comedy, he could teach a masterclass.
Resentful, bitter, pointless, counterproductive lump. And that's
Goodness,
not
he's
a
pulling
good
his punches, isn't he?
strategy. So that's why you think. You think so that your stupid thoughts can die instead of you. If you get
Generally
to the
good.
upper echelons of any
I'm a fan of not
hierarchy,
dying.
Yeah.
you'll start encountering people who know a lot about almost everything. And so if you're stupid and you don't know anything about anything, they're just going to look at you and listen to you for like 2 seconds and think, well, I don't know where this clunk came from, but you know, he's not come along for the ride. You need to be enculturated so that you can play with sophisticated people and you could play a sophisticated and productive game, but also so that you've informed yourself with the greatest ideas of history so that whatever problem you're tackling, you're going to have tools to tackle it with.
So he's talking
Once we
about
get it
classical
well
education.
developed, you'll be able to take all these courses, and then, you know, you won't be a complete embarrassment to yourself.
I didn't enjoy my university experience. The professor wasn't interesting. I was like, I'm pretty sure what they just said wasn't true. I got a psychology professor tell me rats weren't social creatures because they lived in cages. Literally, that happened. It's like, what? Not traveling
Michaela would
40
be the
minutes
one to
this
question.
class. And I
Yeah.
think it's
Right,
cool
well-
that people are told they have to go to university, they have to spend $100,000 to $200,000 to get a degree so they can get a job. Otherwise, they're screwed. It's just a scam, but it bothers me that people are being scammed to learn to not believe in themselves, assume that they can't fix their
wonder why they
problems,
picked
and
that
then
video.
hate their country, basically. It would be funny
So-
if we could blow apart the university
One of the first
system
ones
a
that
little bit
he
because it's broken.
became famous
Here's
off of.
what it did to you. Like, you were alienated out of your job, basically.
You'll be damn fortunate if we can provide you with a list of people who've graduated. And if you had any sense, you'll employ them preferentially because we did the rigorous screening work. And I know how to do the rigorous screening work because I studied that for like 25 years. A degree from our
That's a
university
reasonable...
will signify high-level conscientiousness and general cognitive ability, and those are very valuable for any employer with a clue. So
Curious
I think
if
we just
they'll have
skip
a clue,
the
though.
Yeah.
accreditation process and go right to the employers.
We
Well,
are
some of
planning
them
a soft launch
seemingly-
in November, and we might be able to change the education system. That's funny. It's weird.
Up yours, woke moralists.
Yeah.
We'll see who cancels who.
Exactly.
That's his famous
that kind of
tweet.
Oh
funny.
yeah, that kind of funny.
All right. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool trailer.
It is. It definitely kind of gets you hyped. Launching November 2023, which is why we're talking about it now. In
Yeah.
November.
Okay, that's it.
All right. So, yeah, for sure, I think paying $4,000 for a college education instead of $100,000, that sounds like a good plan to me.
Right. Yeah. So they're looking to undercut traditional universities by like 95%.
Right. That's what they said.
As
yeah.
they mentioned in the video.
Yeah, I think the hardest aspect of what they're going to do or they're attempting to do, and they hit on it, but I'm just curious as how it's going to happen. They're trying to go intentionally around the accreditation process.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sure they'll take accreditation if they can get it.
Yeah, I noticed when I was
don't-
reading about it, and they didn't mention it in
Yeah.
this, but they said on the website that they are seeking accreditation.
Okay.
But that if they don't, then they'll just self-accreditize.
Right.
Right. And that's going to be, I mean,
And that's where I have the question.
yeah.
If he says employers who have a clue will basically say, oh, we know Jordan Peterson is a super expert and his word is good. I personally think that if I was hiring somebody, then I would,
Right.
I know who he is, but is everyone going to?
Right. I mean, for sure, here at the Patriot Post, if you had a Jordan Peterson Academy diploma, I think that would weigh heavily in your favor. But other places, who knows? But you have been hearing about these recruiters who now, if they see a resume that has pronouns in the specially mentioned, then they just don't even look at that one anymore. That's happening. And then you have places like Harvard after this whole pro-Hamas protests at Harvard and letters, all these businesses saying, we're blacklisting all the people on those lists. We're not hiring them.
Yeah.
So I think it might be quite effective.
So Peterson Academy is providing an alternative, but clearly if an alternative is needed or
Necessary.
the perception of a need for an alternative, clearly there's a state of dysfunction or dissatisfaction with what it's being developed for. So maybe we should get into the state of education in the United States.
Yeah. I think that is absolutely why this is happening, is because people are so thoroughly dissatisfied with the education system. We've seen a very large spike. I think it went from like 2 million to 7 million homeschoolers recently in the past decade or something like that. So lots of people are opting out of the public school system, but you also have, you've got all sorts of online options now. There's like Udemy is a online college basically where you pay for a course, and Masterclass, everyone's heard of Masterclass. But I think the problem lies in the public school system, mainly under the Department of Education. I think specifically, I really think the Department of Education was one of the worst decisions ever made. I found in my school experience, because I was homeschooled up until 7th grade, and then from 8th grade through 12th, I went to a private Christian school. So you'd think, well, they're going to be good. And they were. There were some excellent teachers there. There were also some crappy teachers there. But what I found was that all my peers who hadn't been homeschooled, just to take one example, they didn't know or care about history. And I knew and I loved history because I'd read all these books about the individuals, the characters in history, and learned the stories. And at school, you never get that. You get a book and you're like, okay, and then John Brown, you learn that happened on this date, and then it was crushed by, Washington or whatever, and
Lee.
Okay, well, Washington did the Whiskey Rebellion. That's what it was. And you just learn facts and dates and events, and you don't learn about the characters, the people, the reason this matters to you. It doesn't really matter that there was once a battle at some random ferry that's now, a back road outside of, any major city in America. It doesn't matter that happened there. It matters that you know why it happened. It matters that you know what the issues were and how that has influenced politics today.
Yeah, so you're arguing that, and particularly like grade school, the information that's being provided to children is being presented in not a very interesting way, or maybe non-existent way.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's really focusing on the wrong things.
That's what I believe, yes. And then you have, we've done away with civics as a course taught to everybody in America, that's madness, it would seem to me.
Yeah.
It seems like you would want your citizens to know civics.
So why do you think, first of all, why do you think it's taught the way it's taught? And your experience was, this is obviously purely anecdotal on your part.
Right, yes.
You were in a Christian school, so you weren't in a state school. You weren't in a public school system.
Well, I think a big part of it is that there's this huge machine, this huge assembly line of schools and school teachers and grades and testing, and that is kind of nationalized. It's kind of centralized across the country, and so you have basically the same tests being given to students in every state, and you have teachers who are all taught to teach the same way, no matter which state they're going to be teaching in. And you have things like the teachers' unions, which are across the entire country. And so you have teachers in Washington whose say on what should be taught to their students in Washington affecting what gets taught in South Carolina. And that just doesn't make any sense at all. It's a continent away from each other.
So it's the centralization.
That's I think, the biggest problem. There's plenty of others, but that's the biggest one, I think.
Thomas, you have a background in education.
Yeah, I do think that there's a little bit of that for sure. Is one of the factors that brings in, I think, some of the current frustrations and issues that have kind of risen to the forefront. The teachers union seems to be representing an agenda, a specific agenda, irrespective of local communities and the parents in those communities and what their concerns are for their own children. The teachers union seems to have embraced more of this leftist worldview where an ideology is being favored and the push is for having teachers kind of conform to that ideology.
Right. You hear about teachers all the time now who are teaching math, and they're told you have to work critical race theory and white supremacy into your math lesson. It's like that's not possible. You can't be teaching math and teach about white supremacy. They're not in any way related to one another.
Right. So I think you've got an agenda that's kind of crept in. But on top of that, I think that teaching is not an easy profession. You're dealing with every teacher who has a classroom of, 25, 30 students on average. I was a middle school teacher.
Mm-hmm. Were you a member of a union?
No, because it was a private school.
Okay.
Private Christian school. You are quickly confronted with the fact that each of your students is an individual, and each of those individuals has their own individual strengths and weaknesses and interests and disinterests. And the challenge as a teacher on the subject, and I taught social studies and history, so that was my subject, and Bible. You have students who are naturally inclined and fascinated by history. It just is. You are probably
I'm definitely in that camp, for sure.
Mm. And they have a natural drive to want to consume more of it and learn more of it because it just fascinates them. And they're in one sense, they're your star student for that
class,
that subject matter. But then it tends to be that the majority of the students are somewhat they find elements that are interesting, but in our greater culture in which they're growing up in and they're living in, the greater culture isn't that interested in history. And so what the greater culture looks at and what they're getting at by the greater culture is more of values that are more aligned with kind of like where they are right now and what excites them right now, and being energized, and they get energized and excited about that kind of stuff. It could be sports, it could be movies, it could be video games, it can be a lot of these different things, and those tend to be more interesting and more immediate to them. And then history can tend to be like, well, that stuff happened way back in the day, and why do I care?
I will say there are a lot of video games that are actually, I think, helping teach people history. Some examples are the Assassin's Creed games.
That's the one that came to mind immediately for me.
Those are very historically accurate, and they always have little tabs, and you can read about the actual historical figures, and it gives you the correct information versus what you're going to see in the video game, which won't always be accurate because they're making up their own story as well. But then there's also things like the Crusader Kings games, which is highly detailed simulation of medieval Europe and all the different duchies and kingdoms and stuff. And so you just learn about, really what the world looked like, or at least what Europe looked like in that time period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's elements in which that can come in, but are the people playing them because they want to learn history, or are they playing them because it's a game that they can fight against stuff or build
well, for me, it's both, but...
Yeah.
Well, I think that history is very, very important, but I think on the most fundamental level, we need people who can read and write.
Yes. Yeah.
And so maybe we should look up some statistics.
I have already done that. I'm one step ahead of you.
Where are we when it comes to reading and writing? Because regarding history, if you learn to read proficiently, you'll never stop learning about history.
That's right.
Right, and that's what Jordan Peterson was talking about in his video. If you learn to read and write, then you can, what he says is writing is the same as thinking. So when you write, you're allowing the bad idea to go out there, and then you encounter the result, and sometimes you're like, oh, that's not the result I want. And so you're like, all that writing wasn't useless. It taught me that I don't want to do this.
Yeah, the allowing the bad idea to die so that you don't die.
Yes. And well, but that's exactly the point of thinking, is you simulate what would happen, if I run into that cave with that bear. I get torn to pieces, so I'm not going to do that,
And how would I know? Either someone told me or...
I've seen bears tear animals to pieces before.
Yeah. But it's the dissemination of information.
Yeah. So where does America stand at the moment in terms of how well can people read? So
we know it's bad.
It's
been bad for a while.
It looks like the most recent data we're going to find is from 2019, so we'll go with that, even though we know that the lockdowns really put a crimp in people's learning and really pushed them back. Anyhow, so in 2019, it looks like 37% of students in general were at or above proficient reading level in grade 12. So senior year of high school, only 37% were at or above proficient reading level.
Now, I don't know my math too well, but that's a failing grade, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
just checking.
Just checking.
About half of a failing grade, really.
Oh my gosh. Do we know where that stands compared to other prominent countries?
Well, first I'll break it down by male and female. So 32% of the guys in the senior year of high school, only 32% are at or above proficient reading level, 42% of women. So we already knew that the current system, women are doing better than men. We can talk about why that is.
But yeah, but it's not much better.
It's not much better. It's not enough better. I mean, 10% is significant, but it's not enough.
They're both failing, in other words.
Yeah, so I don't have 12th grade in reading levels for the whole world.
But what's causing this? Lack of funding in education?
Right. Are we just not spending enough money on our kids?
Clearly, we're not spending enough money.
That must be it.
Well, that's what
that's
what they tell us.
Hang on, I'm looking at some statistics here. In 2019, and again, this is the most recent year we can get. We'd like more recent because we know it got worse after the lockdowns. But in 2019, the U.S. spent $15,500 per full-time equivalent student on elementary and secondary. So that's K through 12, which was 38% higher than the average for other countries in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which was $11,300 in those countries.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're spending $4,200 more than those other countries. That's more, but we're America, But then if you look at post-secondary, which is college and beyond, the U.S. spends $37,400 per student, where the other countries spend $18,400. So that's about double.
Yeah.
And we're not getting double the results.
So the first statistic there, which is, primary and secondary education, which is public for most Americans.
Yeah.
So that's American tax dollars paying for that.
Oh, yeah.
However, when you're going to higher education, theoretically, that's individual students paying for it. And that's
theoretically, but again, there's so much subsidies and stuff that a lot of that's going to be taxpayer money as well.
Yeah, and Biden's trying to make it free.
Right. And Trump too, actually. But
of course, it wouldn't cost that if the federal government hadn't gotten involved.
Hadn't subsidized it in the first place.
It also wouldn't cost that if, and Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, the bureaucratic wing of university had not grown wildly out of control.
Certainly. Yeah. Essentially, universities are like, we have the ability to go crazy with this money.
Right.
And we're going to build all this stuff so we can drive our rates higher.
Yeah.
And I mean,
and effectively what colleges are doing today is picking the pockets of the future generations.
Yes.
That's absolutely what's happening.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And although it is, so I think it is important to distinguish that it's not just one entity at fault here, that it is the government is at fault and the universities are also at fault, and it's all immoral.
Yeah, it's absolutely immoral, that's for sure, because no one should be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for a diploma that doesn't help that much.
Yeah, and you would think, so education only happens because you have teachers, right?
Yeah.
Teachers are the backbone of the education system. In theory, they should be.
Yeah.
Yet we have a chronic problem of our teachers, you could argue, not getting paid enough.
Yeah. guess so.
And I think that
in primary education,
especially, I'm not sure necessarily for higher education, but I still think even there, probably a lot of it depends on the university, but even there, it's not great. Yeah. If you compare it to other full-time careers, like if you're, for example, if you're a nurse, you're getting paid a whole lot more money than if you were a teacher.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of that has to do with their unions, because their unions are going to bat for their bottom lines. I've never quite understood the teachers' unions when it comes to that. Now, with hospitals and stuff, it's not reliant on taxpayer dollars, or it's not reliant on taxes as much as schools, especially public schools. It's tax funded. You know? So anytime there's a raise or anytime a school gets more money, that means there's going to be a tax increase of some sort on the community. The community is going to vote on that.
Yep.
And so the teachers' unions are effectively going to bat for those raises, trying to convince the local community, hey, this tax is worth it, we should raise it. But what I find strange is even though taxes are raised, more money goes to schools, it doesn't seem like, I would think the primary individuals who should get that money should be the teachers, not the staffing or everything else. Now there's a percentage of staffing that has to be at schools. Of course,
you have to have bureaucrats to keep things functioning, but they should not be the ones in power.
Well, yeah, in the schools, the school is there because there's teachers. Mm-hmm. The teachers should get by far the lion's share of any type of increase in money going to those schools, in my opinion.
And presumably under the principal or dean or whatever you have, they should be the most powerful employees.
So I think what's happened, though, the reason they're maybe not getting as much of that new funding when it comes in is mission creep of schools.
Yep. Yeah. And
schools aren't just doing teaching like the ABCs in math and they're covering a whole other gamut of stuff in regards to raising kids.
Yeah, it's the nanny state.
Yeah.
And probably the public education system is probably the biggest wing of the nanny state in the U.S.
Yeah. And why is that propagated? Because the Democrats essentially think that it's best for centralized power to control everything.
Yeah.
And they also have an interesting idea, and this applies particularly to higher education, and that is we see that these people who go and get college degrees are doing well, so everybody should. Because of that, we're going to subsidize them and throw money at them, basically, or provide them with money. And this goes back to what you're saying, Thomas, based on appropriate resource allocation and to the right parties.
Yeah.
And it's just a misuse or misunderstanding of where to apply the resources.
And this touches on what I was talking about earlier, where there's just some hard facts that people don't like to acknowledge. And so when the university system was in a better state, you go to university, you get a diploma, that diploma essentially guarantees you a job in that field, or at least a good paying job somewhere, at the best. That's what universities should be. And that's what Jordan Peterson was talking about. He was saying if you get a Peterson Academy diploma, it will represent that you are high conscientiousness and intelligent. And that's what diploma should be. But once we started encouraging everyone to go there and we started subsidizing it and making sure that everyone could get a diploma, it shot down the value of a diploma. It shot down what a diploma was worth to a potential employer, because you have a diploma in women's studies, great. That doesn't really help you be an engineer, or, obviously you need an engineering degree, but you understand the concept here.
Meanwhile, we're scaring kids, saying if you don't go into this huge amount of debt, then you are going to be destitute.
Right.
But then what you're actually doing is scaring them into essentially becoming destitute.
because it's rare these days. It's becoming rarer, at the very least, for people who have a diploma to actually out-earn those without just diplomas in general. Certain diplomas are always going to be worth more. A doctorate.
Well, is that,
I do think that
is that true though? I mean, I think it's
not apples to apples.
Yeah, I think the gap is maybe closed down, but I don't know if you can still.
So technically, really you do earn more money if you have a degree, statistically.
But how long does it take to overcome that debt?
That's the issue. And so it depends on the individual, like how much debts. Some people don't have school debt, but a lot of people do. And if you have a huge amount and it takes you practically your whole life, it doesn't matter if you out earn on paper.
Right. Because so much of that money is just going to insurance.
I would say that
debt repayment.
That debt versus, value of your degree is more of a conversation that's really begun within the last decade, because prior to that, there was an acceptable amount of, that was kind of like the balance worked out. But now, over the last decade, I mean, student debt is just, and the cost of college is the reason why student debt's going through the roof. And now we're starting to see this, that the ledger isn't balancing out. Now you're starting to say, wait a second, you're getting gobs of debt, and you're not necessarily getting a degree and even that's going to be able to put you into the workforce immediately in a position to quickly repay that debt.
And even if you do, get a good degree, there's no guarantee, as we're finding out more and more, that you've actually been educated. And as we're seeing this with the student groups at Harvard who signed on to this support of Hamas letter. And, the kind of defense of these students is, well, they didn't really know what they were signing. Well, a college student should have enough insight to be like, oh, I should read this before I put my name to it and publish it before the world. And
Well, now you're talking about ideology and indoctrination.
Right.
Ideology.
That is relevant to the conversation.
It is relevant, but it's almost a little bit different whether or not they're actually educated. But
well, they're maybe miseducated. They know some things, but the things they know aren't representative of the truth.
Okay. I mean, that's something that, agreed.
And personally, I've seen peer after peer of mine go into college as a Christian and maybe not conservative, but kind of apolitical, and then come out non-Christian and political on the left. So, from a conservative point of view, this is just a disaster to have these institutions that we're funding that are basically brainwashing these kids into becoming our political opponents. And they don't love America. That's the other thing.
I saw a terrible meme, terrible meaning hilarious, but also extremely concerning. Parents are sitting at a table, their kids at the end, and he looks literally like Hitler.
Oh.
And it says, "Son, we're concerned about what you're learning at college." I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But to that point you just made there, in the 1930s, German schools, higher ed in Germany was some of the top in the world. And it still produced that type of ideological death cult.
Yeah.
And so
that's true. It can go wrong in many ways, but at least in Germany in that era, they were learning to be, this wasn't necessarily a good thing, but they were learning to be patriotic Germans. They weren't learning to hate Germany and always talk about how Germany is such an evil place. So there was some...
Yeah, but arguably, they did still destroy their country.
They did. So it still led to bad results.
Essentially,
possibly the worst results ever. But
extremism leads to death.
Right. And learning what to think instead of how to think leads to a failing institution.
I think that's the key there, is learning how to think.
Yeah.
That is the most important thing to get out of this.
So that's just been my witness of what college has done to students. Is they've been taught what to think, not how to think, and they've been taught really just things that aren't true. And you can really see this clearly with this Israel Hamas war that's going on right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to tread careful here, because it's easy to throw higher education into one big basket and say it's just deplorable, to take Hillary Clinton's phrase. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of higher education schools out there, and there's a lot of them that are, I would probably say the majority of them, or at least a significant number of them, that are still doing yeoman's work as far as educating people.
Well, parts of probably most universities, that's true.
Probably most STEM departments,
right.
So, maybe law, medicine,
Right.
the engineering, that kind of stuff.
What we tend to hear is the extremes. The extremes obviously tend to grab all the headlines. What's troubling is some of our most prestigious universities
Harvard,
in America,
Yale, Princeton, Stanford.
are the ones that have grabbed the headlines recently for the craziness of things that are happening at them. And you're saying, wait a second, these are schools where we expect to see our future leaders coming out of, because what seemingly the last how many presidents came from attended an Ivy League school?
Majority.
Yeah, almost all of them, I would guess.
Right.
I have no idea.
So when you see those schools producing this type of radicalism, that's where you're starting to say, what's going on?
And it's not just the New England schools. Vanderbilt University here in Tennessee, one of the best schools in the state, had this whole debacle regarding transgender affirming surgery for minors. And it was it was pushing this harder than almost anywhere else in the nation. And it got into huge trouble for that. And it's backed off it now. But this is everywhere.
Well, yeah. So there's an ideology that is popular amongst, for whatever reason, that can creep into academia faster than it does the general culture.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, academia as a subset is much smaller than the general,
But its voice is outsized to its actual
because
population.
it can be, and because it produces, like we say, future leaders and the movers and shakers of, the country as far as business and other things like that. So
Right.
it's going to definitely have an outsized impact. That's why people are so concerned. But what I would say is you have to be careful that there are universities that are still doing good job in educating students, that aren't necessarily just indoctrinating them all in wacko leftism.
Well, yeah, I'm sure they exist. Unfortunately, they're not being representative of the university system at large. The representatives of the university system at large are failing.
Well, yes, in the sense of, I would say in the sense of your big universities.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Insofar as they are colluding with the federal government to burden our future generations with crushing debt, and then they are allowing extremist ideology to become the driving force in their culture.
Yeah. On that point, though, when you make collusion sounds like it's intentional. I don't necessarily know that the majority of this is intentional, and there's this conspiracy, like this is what we're about. I think that the system and how it's being developed, especially when you look at when government decided to start the low interest rate student loan program. What was that called?
Fannie and Freddie.
Yeah, but there was a term for that. I can't remember the name of it. But when those loans, that loan system was kind of developed, it was the idea, kind of like you were saying, like we can get more kids who are from lower income backgrounds. This will allow them to go to college because then they can take out these low interest loans, and this makes college more affordable. And so the intention isn't necessarily wrong or coming from a bad place necessarily, but the result we're seeing is, schools started to increase their enrollments, more and more kids, because that's more and more money, more and more dollars. And so when all this money that comes in, and when you take the adage, you spend money to make money, and these schools embrace that, especially these big schools, and they start spending money like crazy on stuff like new dorms, new buildings, new sports programs, yada, 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 and they're expanding. They're coming these little universes almost. Everything becomes even more expensive, but the whole notion is, effectively being funded by the government, and now it's gotten to the point where it's gotten out of control, where what Peterson is hitting on, the reason why I think Peterson's big thing about he's going to give you a diploma if you go to a school that's 95% cheaper.
$4,000. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, $4,000.
And you think about it and you say, why can't these universities be doing this? And when you look at the increase of the cost of tuition and everything else, it's something like over 150%, it might be 169%. increase over the last 20 years over that of inflation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like you can't just blame it on inflation, in other words. Why is this happening?
So, not adjusted for inflation in the past 20 years, tuition and fees at private national universities jumped about 132%.
Okay.
Adjusted for inflation, that's about 40%. Out of state increased 127 unadjusted. Adjusted, that's 38. In state, 158 unadjusted and 56% adjusted. So that's a 50% increase in price, adjusted for inflation.
So I was doubling it. But what year is this?
This article was written in 23.
Okay. So you're seeing it's still, you can't blame it on inflation. You can't even come close to blaming it on inflation.
Right.
Why is college costing so much? I guess back to the point of, I think the reason now suddenly everyone's like, is it worth it?
Yeah. Well, especially, is it worth it? Am I going to be financially successful in the long run from this? But also, I really think this, and you have a point that it's not literally everybody, but I think it is pervasive and it reaches almost every college student, because you have these critical race deans of diversity, equity, and inclusion at so many of these colleges, and they implement rules like you have to take a critical class just to be able to get a math diploma. And so they're doing their best to make sure everyone gets exposed to this stuff and gets indoctrinated with this critical race theory. And so the danger is, one, will I be financially successful? And two, will I be an American hating, tear everything down and let's live in a Marxist utopia that will never exist idiot after I graduate?
Yeah.
So we've covered a little bit of everything, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so. My biggest hope is that Peterson is right and employers will actually see the value in what he's offering.
Yeah.
I know frequently employers are looking, particularly in the tech space, they don't care so much about a degree anymore. They're more interested in certificates. In some ways, I perceive that this is akin to that, except for in more of like the humanities sense.
Right, because Peterson Academy is going to be more focused.
Yeah, it's
not
classical.
on tech, it's going to be on classical education.
Yeah,
I mean, who knows how far it'll reach, but right now, based on the lineup, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. You're not going to become a technician. You're going to become a mind.
Hopefully a Renaissance man or woman. Yeah.
Right. And be able to have good ideas. Okay. And we need good ideas and free-thinking people who are capable of taking us into the future and solving some really complicated problems that we have to face.
Just the problems we have now, we need good thinkers for that, but we need people who are both rooted in our cultural history and our world history and really understand the history of humanity, but then can look at the new problems that are going to arise that we don't even understand. AI, we're just barely able to grasp some of the problems around that, and look at those problems and come up with the solutions that are necessary for the 21st and the 22nd century.
Yeah, it's kind of like he's hearkening back to kind of maybe original vision for the university, and it was you called it classical education. It wasn't about learning how to farm or learning how to. You could say engineering came into it.
Yeah,
but it was more about learning how to think, learning how to understand the ramifications of decisions that may be made regarding government or other societal issues. You're becoming a thinker, an egghead, as it were, as a pejorative. But that was kind of the university. And so when the average Joe back in the day would have looked at the university, it was almost like, am I going to be a person who's going to be a thinker, who's going to can kind of move culture and go in that direction? That's why I think a lot of the universities also early in American history were also seminaries, because there were schools for pastors and producing pastors and religious, Christian teachers.
Yeah, and philosophy and theology are intricately linked.
Right. And so I think that what Jordan Peterson is trying to do, I think, is go back toward that being the focus of the higher education and not so much necessarily, STEM or stuff like that. Not that you do need higher education for that, but that's like a different avenue. The person who's learning how to split the atom should be concerned with the ethical ramifications of what they're doing to a degree, but really just the know-how and how to proceed with that and everything is going to take so much of their kind of focus and understanding.
Right. Oppenheimer needed to spend years studying specifically science and atoms and stuff, not necessarily. I mean, it would be good if he knew about Ovid and
but they're not the ones to make the decision of whether or not society needs it.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know. I guess I think that what we're seeing right now is with the internet, it has allowed for people to learn. I mean, if you want to learn how to change the oil in your car, change your tire, do all kinds of work around your home.
You watch a 5-minute
You
YouTube
effectively
video.
have a university at your fingertips for that. It'll show you. There's hundreds of people online who will show you how to do these things.
Yep.
So the skills trades, like becoming a plumber, electrician, all these others, those are becoming more. I think there's starting to be more people starting to come out of high school asking that question, like, well, I don't want to do that, but if I do that, I can actually even make more money, not go into debt, have all this opportunity, and it's more interesting to me, etc.
Yeah.
And not have the sense of which, well, you need to do all this other kind of humanities and all, well, not to put that down, but you have to go through all this other higher education stuff that you're going to ask yourself the whole time you're going through it. Well, what is this worth to me? And I'm spending all this money. But all I want to do is build houses.
Right. Trade schools are, I think, going to need to be massively encouraged in the younger generations.
Well, they already are. I mean, you got Mike Rowe.
Yeah.
He's
Dirty Jobs.
He's got his he supports, is it Generation Next, I think?
I don't know
teamed
about this.
up with it. It's I think it's also the guys that do This Old House.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's this program where they try to encourage high school kids or recent graduates or something to take a look at getting into the building trades.
Great.
Yeah. Awesome.
And so that's
and that is what we're seeing. We're seeing more democratization, I guess, of the university system just via the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely, I think, for the best. There's some risks, but I think it's worth it, especially considering the state of the university system today.
Yeah, and when you say risk, what do you mean?
Well,
there are some employers who may still say you need a degree to get in.
Well, there's certainly that, but I was thinking more of when you democratize it, when you make it less institutionalized, less formal, you may have a problem with retention and actually getting people to truly learn the subject because it's at their fingertips all the time. And it's not like they have to show up at a class.
Oh, you mean with the internet?
Yeah.
Yeah. I see. So if but a lot of times if you're going into the trades,
it's hands-on. I mean, you're on the job because
there's usually apprenticeship programs or something.
Yeah.
You're learning from.
Well, and I think apprenticeship is something that has been defocused in our society for too long. I think apprenticeship is something that's very important for a lot of these.
I think it's actually over the last, I want to say decade or so, apprenticeship has become, it's growing. It's kind of resurging.
Yeah.
Is a way
we have been seeing, especially over the last decade, maybe 15 years, a kind of move away from traditional education systems to some of these even older traditional education systems, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what have we talked about today? We talked about Peterson Academy. We watched that video.
Yeah. The reason why alternatives seem to be on the rise.
Yeah.
The issues that we were having throughout all avenues of education.
From
mainstream.
kindergarten through postgraduate even,
Mm-hmm.
although we didn't touch on postgraduate very much. We talked about the teachers' unions and how maybe nationalizing that wasn't the best idea and maybe they should be more local so they can be focused on the actual issues for the region.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you wanted to point out that we're not against teachers.
Yeah.
There are fantastic teachers out there, and teachers are doing incredible work when they're doing their work well.
It's just like Jordan Peterson is a teacher.
Right.
I mean, it's a noble profession. Let's not forget that. It's kind of like,
but it's like being a knight. Being a knight, that's a noble profession, but there's bad ones. There's white knights and there's black knights.
I think what happened, I was kind of thinking of, just a little aside, as conservatives, we'll readily come to the defense of law enforcement and the police.
Well,
we tend to lean a little bit more favorably toward them generally. It's not that we'll say, oh, they're always right, and we can point to, but we recognize the necessity of police.
Yeah. I would say personally I lean more against statements like defund the police and ACAB than I do necessarily in favor of the police.
No, I would say that conservatives generally are in favor of the police because they recognize the nature of humanity. And
Right.
you have to have a police force because people, if they're unpoliced, will do bad things.
Right. And that's true.
But there definitely are instances of bad, corrupt police. On the reverse, it's easy for us to harangue and get kind of demonize education because it's so bad in so many ways. We see it and we can point to it, and we like Baltimore schools, Exhibit A. And we have to be careful that we don't kind of do the reverse, that when we're talking about the way the kind of the left talks about policing, that we don't talk about education in the same way. We have to recognize, no, education is good. It's necessary. It's needed. We do want an educated population. We want everybody to know how to read and write.
And many of these problems aren't that the teachers are the problem. It's that the rules the teachers have to abide by are the problem, where you have teachers who teenage boy can get up in their face and threaten them with violence, and they have no recourse whatsoever except to wait till they're done and then ask them to sit back down.
Yeah.
And that's just a disaster, clearly.
Yes. There's been some issues that have happened, I mean, within the culture of our broadly speaking, our education system. There's been a lot. There's just a lot of corrupting agents that need to be addressed, and that's really, I guess, the root of what we're trying to say. And I think that's what, with Peterson, he's focused higher education. Yeah. That's his focus, obviously, and he's seen the corruption at the higher education level, which, in one sense, is a little bit different than the type of corruption, although they're connected, that it's down at the primary and secondary levels.
Right.
Well, they're based on the same worldviews.
In a lot of ways, yes.
Yeah.
Because the higher ed is producing the teachers.
Correct.
Producing the ideas that are floating down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we talked about that. We talked about college and the debt crisis and alternatives, trade schools, all that stuff. Yeah, we hope that Peterson Academy and online things like Udemy and even YouTube will push and challenge the university system to right the ship, because it desperately needs it. And I think that's all of our goal, right?
We could say if the free market is allowed to, this is what I would say, my last thing, if the free market is allowed to, it will do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because people in a free system with a free market, people demand better.
Right. But the free market did not give us this broken university system. Government meddling gave us this broken university system, along with other things.
Yeah. But when there's somebody that decides that they're going to pick the winners and losers, that's when you start having this problem, because they have their own agendas of what they want to see, and that will impact the result of what's produced.
Absolutely. Yep.
Government doesn't know what's good for you.
No.
And they may have good intentions, but putting everyone in the same box, it just goes in the same direction.
Right. It might work, if you've got 300 people in your community, but when you've got 300 million, you need a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
Well, this is why we believe in federalism.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you decentralize government, and because you have to have government. That's another thing.
We
always rag on government.
Unfortunately necessary.
But government is necessary, because to go to Peterson, within the universe and within nature, there's a natural hierarchy. What is hierarchy if it isn't government?
Yeah.
So what we are wanting to see is a more of a decentralized system than a centralization. And really, you could say that's been the constant battle between the two political parties. One is saying less centralized, the other is saying more centralized.
It even predates the current political
parties.
Yeah,
oh yeah, this is a long time going.
Since, the Federalist and the
beginning.
Anti-Federalist papers, or even before that, probably.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess that's our episode, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't solve all the problems, but
one day we will. World peace is next week, and we'll knock that one out. And then hunger, we got to, give us a little bit of time.
We got to get back to the lighter topics.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
When's the next movie?
Right. Well, Napoleon coming out later this month.
Yes, we will review.
Napoleon, that is a light topic.
Well, it's a movie at least. It's a movie at least. All right. Well, this has been our episode on Peterson Academy and the challenge, the hope for the future of education. This is the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew. We hope you'll tune in next time. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest online news digest on the web. It can be found at patriotpost.us. Be sure to like and subscribe. Bye.
Bye.